I'm Sari Chapman. I work for TVIS. I previously worked for Infineon for 13 years. And AsureSign is a tool that we've driven because of the drive towards requirements engineering. So we've moved more towards having a requirements-driven test methodology because we found there was some missing tooling out in the world when we tried to implement requirements engineering. What is AsureSign? AsureSign is a tool that's been written by TVS. It's an automatic requirement and test tracking tool. What it does is it accumulates data over time. So it accumulates the status of your tests, whether they're in existence, whether they're running, and their pass and fail, and coverage metrics. So we have coverage for requirements. We also have structural, branch, etc. within the hardware terminology. So we have coverage metrics. The tool actually maps the requirements to the tests and also to the results. So within the tool itself, we can have the requirements, we can also have the test plan, and we can have that linking down to the tests and then down to the results. And it also helps you evaluate the progress of the project. So we can look at different regressions or different results over time. So what we're actually driving is this new requirements-driven test methodology. So this is quite new. We've normally done coverage-driven test methodologies or just directed test methodologies. And now we're looking to just drive the tests that we need to actually prove that our requirements have actually been implemented. So if you want to use AsureSign as a requirements top level, you can essentially put your requirements into the database and have your requirements then that you can refine them within the tool. If you want to do that, you must have the requirements at a suitable level of granularity. So really you want this down to your feature level or your feature sets that you want to test. If you don't have a set of requirements or you don't want to use it as a requirements tool, then you can just use it as a test tool and essentially put your test plan within the tool itself. So for the purpose of this slide set, the terms requirements and test plan are essentially interchangeable. So AsureSign captures the requirements in a couple of manners. So we have a graphical user interface. This you can use as an XML import for bulk requirements. This means that if you collect your requirements within another tool, as long as you have an XML and it supports our schema or we can translate it via XSLT, we can then import your requirements into the tool. You can also manually edit the requirements or write them in yourself within the tool if you don't have any external tooling. We also have a command line interface, and that will also allow XML import. So we can do bulk updates on your requirements, etc., and re-import them also if you like. And it all gets stored within a MySQL database. So it basically accumulates data over a period of time, and it gives you the status of how the tests are, what their coverage metrics are, basically the maturity of your project. It does all this within the command line interface, the interfaces to the tool, so it stores all the information into the database for you. So we put some relations in it. So we try to map the requirements, as we said, down to the test plan and then down to the test results. We use some intelligent algorithms to interpret the results and translate them into pass and fail criteria for the requirements traceability completeness. Essentially, within the hardware world especially, we have multiple types of test criteria to say whether they're pass or fail. They're not necessarily got something called a pass. We might have a coverage check, or we might have a percentage coverage, which would be our metric for passing. So we interpret those and we allow manipulation of those to suit your purposes. So it evaluates. We can evaluate how the project is progressing. We have a main dashboard which has graphs and history tables. We're also able to export the results for any audit proofing documentation. We also have an analyzer window which allows you a more in-depth view of how we're getting on in the project. It also allows you to export the results in XML format. So because we have this XML format, we'll find that most tools do have an XML import or exporter, so it will allow you to be used by other tooling externally. You can get the information out and put it into other tooling. if we just look at the tool, we have requirements that can go into AsureSign. It can read the coverage database results and test results and view it all within the dashboard. I'm going to go into the terminology because the terminology can get quite confusing because we're going across software and the hardware domain, and we're also talking about a tool. I think it makes sense for us just to explain what we mean by these terms. So requirements are the statement of stakeholders' needs, objectives, and the expectations of a product. This is your feature level requirements that we have, which we're essentially replacing the old top-level test plan with a set of feature level requirements. Features within AsureSign are something different. So these are the functions that you need to satisfy the product requirements, and you can then refine these into sub-features or goals to achieve what you need to achieve. So you have a requirement, you want to know whether it's been implemented, and the only way that you can prove that it's been implemented is by testing it and getting that proof, which we call proof of implementation. So a goal, this is an atomic unit of a feature or sub-feature. So this is the lowest level we go down to inside AsureSign, to which result metrics are associated. So it's a measurable unit. But goal is essentially your test plan. So your bottom level test plan is saying this is how we're going to test this and ensure that it works. The mapping is a pattern or a string and may contain some wild characters. So the mapping can map between your goals and your tests essentially. But with metrics also, which I don't have on the slide, the metrics is what we map to the goals, and the metrics are essentially the tests themselves. With the terminology, again, we have a goal that is passing or a fail that's failing the target metrics. We allow the users to set up what their target metrics are and decide what is a pass state and what is a fail state. A new metric, so a new metric is something that was captured in a particular regression but was not present in the earlier one. So if we have a metric which is essentially equivalent of a test, and you've got a test in this regression but it wasn't there before, we alert you to the fact that you've got a new test. If we've got an unmapped, so this is a test that isn't associated with test plan, anything in the test plan, so the metric doesn't have a goal, then you have to ask yourself whether you need that test, whether you need to maintain that test, or do you have a missing goal? Do you need to go back and refine your test plan and assure that you have an association? Those that are mapped, that's the metric which might be mapped to one or more goals. It could be that you've got lots of subunits that you put into a bigger unit, and it might be that one test or metric might actually satisfy more than one of the goals. Milestones. So within this development of the project, I think most people are aware that they have a milestone process to progress this. So this is a significant stage, and you can set your goals. So you can set your tests and say that you want to associate a certain type of test need to be passed at your first milestone goal. This does allow you to do an early release to another project and say, we've only tested this part, so please don't test outside that realm. Executed is when a metric has been run and completed, so that's when a test is actually running. The metric missing, this is a metric that was previously executed, so it's a test that did used to run but was no longer executed, and you don't have a pass or fail rate, so it's essentially you've got a hole within your methodology. Goal missing, this is saying that there used to be a goal to test something within the test plan, but it's now been taken out. If it's been taken out and you still have the test there that was associated with it, you then have to ask yourself whether you still need that test or coverage point. Goal or metric type, this is the type of particular goal. Because AsureSign can recognize what assertions look like and what directed tests look like, you assign it and tell it what type of thing you're looking to map it against. So we know that this is actually covered by a coverage point or a cover bin or a directed test. A goal or metric item, within the tooling itself, the item is essentially the name of a particular goal or a metric. We then have a state, so we have, this just describes the state, the status of each of the tests or metrics. So we have a pass, a fail, metric missing, etc. So I'm going to run through the interfaces that we have within AsureSign, just so that you can understand them in slightly more detail. So the graphical user interface, We've actually got three main windows for interpreting and editing. We have the dashboard, which is the main one. We have the editor, which does, as the name suggests, is an editor window, and an analyzer, which does as the name suggests, which is analyzes it. We also have command line interface. We do have extra functionality that can be called only by the command line interface. So it is an indispensable means because of the fact that you can then script around it and automate some of the things within your scripting if you want to automate them. It also allows for batch updates. So with XML import and export, you can do batch updating. So this is the dashboard. Within the dashboard, we always follow a hierarchy. If you're importing from another tool, then you're obviously going to keep that hierarchy intact. One of the issues that we find with Infineon when we've been trying to implement requirements engineering is that the hierarchy seems to be different in different tools. And that provides you with a problem because then you have to start to write your lookup tables and associate different sections with different sections. You can keep the hierarchy from another tool by means of the import. This does help you. So the root node always holds the name of the project. When you actually set up a project, you have to name it, and that will become the root node, which is this top one. It's created automatically, and the rest of the nodes can be either imported, so they can be imported from an XML, from an external tool, or you could create them manually. We've got the hierarchical tree, so the root node is the name of the project. The feature can exist, and it can be a collection of goals based on the hierarchy. So it's all hierarchically based. So you can have sub-features. You could have one feature made out of 3 sub-features plus 3 goals at the same level. You can mix and match it as you want and how you deem it makes most sense to your project. The goal, these are the goals. Each requirement has to be broken down to an atomic element. So that goal is essentially your bottom level where you're saying this is the test that I need or this is the coverage point that I need. And those are essentially your goals, so it's the bottom level. And the mapping is a pattern. So this is just doing a pattern match to link between the goal and the metric, so down to the coverage point or test. It maps the goal inherently the feature, so therefore you've got all the mapping that goes up through the features. You have these being mapped to a test and then up to a sub-feature and then up to a sub-feature and up to a main feature. So the history table, within the dashboard we have a history table. So we have, for each regression that we set up, we have a regression ID, and they are unique. Regression is the name of the regression, so you can name a regression. If you see here, they've got it called another version, more verbose version. The date, so this tells you the date and time for when the regression is created, and defined is the number of goals that you have defined under that feature. So we can open this up, and then you might have a certain amount of goals or tests associated with each subsection. We also then have, as we mentioned earlier, that we have how many were mapped, how many were executed, how many were passing, and also, like we said, we have a name that at this point we were actually a gold metric for us. We have bronze, silver, gold to see the maturity essentially of each of the projects. The history graph, this essentially shows a visual representation of that history table, so it charts the progress over time. So visually it's just very easy to say, well, okay, I've got these spikes here, what do they mean? And it allows you quickly to analyse whether you think the project's moving along as you expect it to. Within the dashboard, it acts as a launcher. So this is the main one that comes up when you call up AsureSign, that then allows you to launch the other windows. So we have 3 manners of launching the window. So we can launch it via the AsureSign Open editor. There's also an automatic call to it here, or else you can right-click and call it. The editor window is essential for you to map your goals down to your metrics, so your test plan to your tests, and it also allows you to add and modify the requirements within there. So this is the editor view. So within the editor view, the goals may import their description. So one point is that you need to, as you move along a project, it's no good waiting until the end of your milestone and saying, let's write up all of the testing that we did, etc. You really need to keep these test descriptions up to date as you move along. A lot of the time you might reuse tests, etc., and then you might change them over time. But if you wait to the end of the project and then try to update the job description, it's likely you won't have that information now, or you may have forgotten that you've done anything. So we allow you to put the description in, and this can be kept up to date during the project. Also, we have this comments field, and the comments field will allow you to have things that you don't have to take out into the report. So when you have a test report at the end, you can take out the description, but the comments are just for internal usage. So if you've got multiple people using this, then you might want to give them some information, such as I've put a temporary bug fixed in at the moment for this test. Please take it out once this is fixed. So it allows us to have the live updates, and also will allow you to be able to dump out the documentation at the end, and you'll know it's up to date because you've kept it up to date within this editor as you've moved along. The hierarchical tree, again, we make a lot of mention about the hierarchical tree, but it really is quite an important thing because it allows you to control a project in a very timely manner, and it allows you to keep control of the data in quite a tight way. It contains the features and goals in a hierarchical fashion, obviously. Within here, you can create, delete, modify, copy, move, rename features and goals. So you can move these around. Sometimes within a project, you might have a certain hierarchy that you think suited it, but then suddenly they've split one team into two and you want to split them all out. You may want to move this hierarchy around. It allows you to do it within this tab. So the fields in the pane are also editable, so you can change the names of them within here. So the features goal detail pane. So this has the detailed information and the attributes. So we have a set of attributes related to the selected features or goals. See here we've come down to a goal and we're having a look at the information. This is also editable. Mapping. Right, this is the bit that Infineon essentially drove in within the tool, is that I needed from my requirements flow to map down to tests and to results. And currently I don't see any other tools out there really doing this. The mapping string, so this tells you the mapping string and it will allow you, it's essentially a simulation path, so it will look down for a particular type and it will allow you to select it and say this maps to this one. So it's also used for test review and analysis, so you can also look at more information about how things are being tested. So it can only be modified within the editor. We also have the item name here, which, as I said, that's the name of the goal. And the parameters, essentially, that's being taken out, I believe. I didn't really find any for it. The required percentage. Now, with hardware, we have something called random testing, and we have a certain coverage point. So at our tape out, essentially, we need 100% coverage. You might want 100% statement and branch coverage, etc. But at earlier milestones, it could be that we don't actually need 100%. Maybe we just need 50% for an interim milestone, and we're expecting a certain maturity at a certain time point. So we can actually overwrite whatever percentages we have on a per goal basis, if you like. So if it's actually greater than what we've selected, it's a pass. If it's less, then it's a fail. So we can specify the completeness of things on a per goal basis, on a per test basis, essentially. So you don't have to, you can set it up for the entire project, or you could set it up for an entire milestone, or you can then overwrite it on particular features. So it can also be updated externally and then re-imported on the XML import. You don't have to do it within the tool. You can do it externally. The mapped metrics. So these are the mapped metrics. So it shows the list of metrics that are mapped and associated with a particular goal. So we have, and this is the metrics pane, sorry. We then have an unmapped metrics. These are the ones that aren't mapped. So therefore, these are tests or assertions, etc., that don't have a requirement within the test plan. And then we have all metrics. Why it's interesting that we don't have something in the test plan, because one, you could say that your test plan's incomplete, so you're also testing your test plan at that time. Or you can ask yourself why you've got these tests, why have you got that coverage checker. A lot of the things that we find is that over time you end up essentially being passed over test bench and tests, and although you might have a description, you might not, but you've actually inherit an awful lot of tests that you might not know what they're for. that actually costs an awful lot of time maintenance-wise. You can be fixing tests constantly, and you're not quite sure what they're doing. You're a bit scared to take them out, but you really need to analyse this and say, do I actually need these tests? Can I afford to maintain tests that aren't actually testing any of my features set that I need for this particular product? So this is actually quite an important thing for us, that we want to start saying, if we don't have a need for that test, then let's take it out. Let's not try and fix it. It's essentially dead code. Right, the next one is the analyzer. This is one for in-depth analysis of the regressions. So again, it's from the dashboard. We have an analyzer launch, so we can launch it from here, from the open analyzer, and also you can click on these within the main dashboard, and it will take you to the analyzer window. And it allows you to investigate the results with respect to goals and features. So this is when you're actually analysing from the top level your regression. You've got your regression results. You want to see what happened in it. The analyzer is something that allows you to analyse this. So we have the requirement tree again, and the hierarchy. It shows the passing and failing and the percentage of each feature or goal for a particular regression. It displays the information related to the selected feature and goals. So in the editor, we did some analysis, some editing of the description and any comments. When you're looking at the analyzer, because at some point you might not be using the editor anymore, you're just using the analyzer, you still want that information. So you can't edit within here, but you should actually have that information to hand so that you're aware of any comments that are trying to be passed across, etc. So this is the metric pane, and the metric pane displays the pass-fail criteria. You see here we've got some passes. We've got the ones that a list of all the ones that are executed. So we have unmapped, all executed. We have goal grading, which describes the completeness of the goal. You might actually say that, and feature grading. So with some features, you may have some features, a certain functionality that you may have 10 goals, so 10 tests that you want to run for it. And you might say, well, actually, if only 5 of those pass, then I'm quite happy. So you can have a look at that and see how close to completeness you are. So each metric can be assigned to a type. So the metrics might be a test, it might be a functional coverage point, a structural coverage, it might be an assertion or an instance. It also allows you can filter. So when you're looking at the analyzer, you can filter on a particular pattern match. So you would put in that you only want to look at one particular IP or something, or a sub-part of the project, and then it will filter out everything except for pieces that you're interested in. So it allows you to, it helps you basically do your analysis. Right, round tripping. This is quite an important part of the tool, I think. A round trip is you can export the project from AsureSign. So you export essentially the main database information. You can therefore change that as a bulk change, edit, and then you can re-import them. So you can export them, and then you can have an editing tool, and it just makes it easier than having to go through each particular one if you want to do a multiple change. It also allows variant management. This is an issue that we are hitting more and more with the more products that we have running alongside each other. So if we change, we're changing the requirements as we go across different variants. Obviously, you've only got a variant if it varies slightly. So when you export an XML, you can re-import it into a new database for your new variant, for example, and you'll actually do, this is called a full export import. So that will turn around and keep all your mappings. So you're not losing any of your mappings. You've got all the information there, and you can completely reuse your tests and your information, how you map to your tests, etc. Basically, if you take out and you do a bulk import, you are looking after all of your mapping. You don't have to redo all that work. However, your requirements have changed. So as you see in a minute, it allows you to do a partial import just to re-import your top-level requirements. You will then turn around and see the ones that aren't mapped, so new tests, and you'll have the ones that suddenly you've got tests, but there's nothing in the test plan, so the requirements disappeared, which allows you then to take those tests out and not run them for that particular variant. It does also support for this multiple XML schemas. Currently, Infineon Drive 1 called ArcXML. It has its own schema, but it can support multiple schemas, especially if you're already within your company using specific XML schemas for showing data around your tooling. There are 3 ways to import. So if we look at the imports, it can do bulk imports via the XML, and you can do this from the dashboard, from the editor, or from the command line. And you've got these 2 options, as I mentioned, complete and partial. So we have a look at this. We've got XML, an XML import type. It takes all your features and goals and puts them into your new project database. Then we have, and it then automatically shows it up in the GUI, as you can see here. You've got the 2 imports. So the partial import, this allows you to analyze and review the requirements before you actually import the process starting. You can select the actual requirements for import. So it's not necessarily that you just want the top level. You might want a particular group that you want to import and not all of them. If a child node is selected for insertion, then it will have to take its parents with it. So it's automatically got to come with its parents. It can't be allowed to run wild on its own. The complete import means all the existing requirements, features and goals, except for the root node itself, will be deleted from the database, and the requirements defined in the XML file will be imported. So that's a complete overwrite, basically, and this is what we can use for a new project. The Analyze button, so this is the partial by the GUI. So you can obviously write it via the command line interface if you want to do an automatic, just update the requirements top level, or you can come through and analyze it yourself. The new means it will display the requirements which are not in the database, so you can select which of those you want to import. The Modify, this displays a list of existing requirements which are going to be modified after the import, so we know that they're there but they will change. Ignore, this displays a list of duplicated requirements in the database. You don't want to import ones that are duplicated. And duplicate in requirements in XML. This is if it's seeing duplicate ones in the import that's coming in. This is the summary report after an import via the GUI. So it tells you what's been added. So it tells you all the new requirements which have been added to the database. Modified, this will give you a list of all the ones that are modified, so you can go through and check what the modifications were. Deleted is the list of all requirements that have now been deleted from the database. Like I said, as we move along from product to product, it's likely that you'll delete a whole load. So unmapped goals, this is the list of requirements which are not yet mapped to a metric. This means that you've got a new test and you haven't got a test for it yet, so you planned a new test. If you know more metrics, displays all the metrics that are no longer mapped to a goal. So these are essentially all the ones that you don't need to run in this latest product. Obviously, this is how we're using it, but you can use this on a particularly different way that might suit you better. And there are many reasons for exporting the data from AsureSign. So like we said, for use on the next product, it's useful sometimes just to export plan without any results. So one of the things we analyze is that during the progress of the project, it might be that we want to have written all the tests by a certain point, and we know therefore we're halfway through. So you might want to not just have it with results, you might want to just say, right, okay, I've got those tests, so I've got those metrics, and I've got those metrics mapped, and then you've got the metrics executing, and then you've got them passing, so you can stage it. Project audit, that you might want to export the plan and the results for project audit purposes. Normally we have to give a test document at the end explaining what we've done for future teams, essentially, and also for if the customer wants to see what we've done. Management, to export the status and see the project progress. So like we said, we could, and we are actually looking at putting a management tool on top of this to read multiple XMLs and allow you to chart your project progress. For the next level of hierarchy, if you've got a subsystem made up of lots of different modules, you might have tested all the modules, you might want to reuse a lot of that, and you can import them and put them together almost like a jigsaw. And also for interacting with other tooling, so requirements engineering tools, for example, or management analysis tools, you can read these XMLs. Once you have XML, you can tool around it quite heavily. During export, the user can select any node, feature, goal, and the related fields can be marked for selection. So the field selection is via a dialog box, and the choice may be saved as an export filter file. So essentially, you can turn around and decide what information you want exported. So this allows you essentially to tailor your documentation. You can also save that tailoring, so you can save an export filter file. And along with all the nodes, the root node information will always be exported. So it's always going to take your root with it, because that's the name of the project. But then it will just take whatever you decided that you want to have in that document. You've got two options to export. You can either reuse this export filter file, or you can manually select fields. So the user can manually select the fields and data. So when exporting, you can use the export filter file. You might also then update a couple of pieces of information, which you then can save over the top or specify as another filter file. This is where you select an existing one. And if the modification is made to that existing one, then the tool is going to ask the user if you want it to update the existing file or whether you need to rename it. We can export the regression results into XML from the GUI. If we select, then we can choose a regression, and we can just export particular regression results. Perhaps at the end of the project you want a particular regression, you want that information saved and documented or checked in, then you can choose that one that you want to use. And you can save the XML into whatever location you want. So requirements and results. So we have a project, and then we have an export, and then it will take the features and goals and the regression information, and we can use the configuration file if we want, but then we can produce a PDF from it or an XML. XML is brilliant for extra tooling, and PDF we find is brilliant for audit proofing. So we know we will have the information about which regression, so therefore we know that this particular one that came out at the same time as this one will have a unique ID of the regression, so we can map these through without having to put extra metadata within the tooling. So the regression ID is a unique integer, and it's used to identify the coverage or the test data. So we know that each ID relates to a particular set, and we can get all the information such as the date and snapshot time that was run. So this is quite important for requirements engineering and audit proofing for the standards that are out there now. So regressions are the vehicles to be used for the historical comparison and for analysis of the overall project. So essentially we're looking at different regressions to see how we're progressing, and AsureSign needs to know where we're getting that information from, where that regression ID came from, etc., what version we were looking at, etc. So after registering a regression, we can launch the GUI, and the dashboard will show the contents and show you a particular regression that we've run. We can read. The great thing about AsureSign that we found is that in the hardware world, all of the tools now support this schema called UCIS, which is a unified coverage schema. So we have this from our formal properties and our random properties and other tooling all support this one schema, which means that AsureSign is able to turn around and read the information, calculate what the results are, and store it for us. So it simplifies the flow for us, essentially. So the select and compare, this is on the multiple regressions. So on the analyzer, so this is the analyzer window, you can select the regressions, and the select regressions dialog box appears, and it's possible to compare 2 or 3 regressions, so you can pick up and choose which regressions that you want to see. Within this one, we can see that we've got 3 regressions. It's telling you the pass rate. I would hope that this is going in the wrong direction date-wise, because I'd rather have a higher pass rate as we progress. It tells you how many are failing. So you can start to analyse and see why your regressions, where you've got massive differences in your regressions. So the regression comparison results can be viewed based on different criteria. So we can see the metric view, which is related to goals associated with metrics. So that's tests, plan to tests, or the goal view to see more details related to metrics associated with goals. So this is actually the opposite way around, to see what's missing. AsureSign, so configuration management, also important in requirements engineering. AsureSign integrates with the external configuration management tools. So it doesn't have its own configuration management, which is normal for most tools. They wouldn't have it, but it is able to interface to them, and and associate essentially the unique IDs of the regressions against particular configuration labels, or if you're not using a source control system or a version control system, then we can use timestamps. It allows the user to add manual sign-off results to the goals. So sometimes you might have verified a goal via a waveform or something, and the only way that you can actually verify that you've essentially passed a goal is by looking at the waveform and manually saying, right, okay, that looks right to me, but you can't automate that pass-fail criteria. So you might want to sign that off and capture the information in AsureSign that you've passed this off because of this waveform, and this waveform is actually stored in this particular place. Or that a goal has been verified using a tool where the output is not automatically collected by AsureSign, such as in the lab. So it allows you to turn around, not every time, sometimes even the requirement might even not require a test, so you could always just sign off and explain or justify how you've actually proven that that feature is working, that requirement feature. The milestones are user-defined, and this for significant events to allow you to control the progress of the project. So it will allow a user to define a target to be a subset of the full target. So we can say 50, let's say half of our tests should be written at this point, all of our tests should be written by this point, all of these tests should be running by this point. You can turn around and stagger this, and you'll have an early indicator if you're going to start running behind. So it could be that you, in earlier regressions, you might remove a whole lot of tests and just say we're going to start running these tests at a certain point. Until that milestone's reached, we won't bother with these because they're complex to debug and we need to get the basic stuff working. So the AsureSign can also report progress against milestones. So if at a milestone you are releasing documentation, we can give you documentation on a per milestone basis. So we can view at each regression, and we can do comparisons on milestone stage. So we can do comparisons across different regressions that are matched on different milestones. Following actions are available from the AsureSign GUI, so we can manage the milestones. So they can be created manually via the GUI, which I'll show you, or they can be imported via an XML file where you can update and say these are all gold. We can define a milestone percentage, so each milestone is associated, so we can say what percentage we want covering, etc. As I mentioned, we can view milestones in detail, so we can look at the information behind the milestones. We can import milestones, so we can allow the users to import the milestones via an XML or export it via an XML. So this is a dashboard for the milestones. We call it the milestone, and for example here we define the milestone percentage. And the milestone window allows you to assign grading or milestones to each hierarchical level. So we have the unique ID, the hierarchy of the feature, and then we have these different milestones and tells us what percentage we want passing per milestone. We also have the ability to lock a global feature. So once we've actually done all the editing at the beginning, what we can do is we can lock either the whole test plan or the whole plan, or we can lock just particular ones. Only the super users are able to lock it, but all of the subnodes, anything below, will also be locked at that point. This stops people from being able to edit it on the hop. Once you've actually got to a certain milestone, you might go into a change management process before you allow it to change. So this will allow you to lock into a frozen, essentially, test plan or requirements plan. One of the most difficult things to stop is the change progress project. You're always going to have change, but you need to control them quite strictly. You can also unlock them, so only the super user can unlock them, and it'll also unlock everything below. So round tripping. So there's reuse. As I said before, I won't go into, I'm starting to run out of time, so I won't go into this in great detail, but as I said, with variant management, we can reduce the regression. We can analyze what we actually need, what actually maps up to something of interest. You know, we don't want to test, generally with testing, you try to test as much as you really can. Essentially, you need a full set of requirements for those tests. If you don't have a set of requirements for those tests, then you've got to ask yourself why you're maintaining tests that you don't need anymore, and this will help you do that. There are many other features that we haven't covered in the presentation, such as we can mark a requirement as obsolete. We can actually say this is now an obsolete, so we can keep the information. If you want to start taking out tests or you want to turn around and start removing things, You don't have to just delete them. You can keep the information and you can mark them, whether it's obsolete, and keep the reasoning behind that. You can baseline your test plans and your requirements. So we've got the documentation. We can do baselining out of it. You can ensure that you've got a certain thing to sign off. So there is a method to sign off within the tool. We can copy and move features, which we did mention. We didn't really show you. And that is it, I think. So we can pass over to questions if you have any.
Okay, Iana is asking if the tool ISO 26262 is qualified. Or
you can't qualify. I've just had my ISO 26262 training from David Ward, who's on the committee who writes the standard. He says you can't qualify any tools on it. If you actually look at the qualification within ISO 26262, because we've been driving this because we needed it for that particular standard, it just basically states that you've got a certain level. Now, if this tool was a single point of failure, that if we missed a particular test or something within this tool, then would that have a critical failure? Then no, we're not. We're actually interacting with other tools. We're not critical in any manner or form. But you cannot accredit any tool. In fact, what David Ward said he's from Mira, is that nobody should be saying that any tool is accredited with this. You can say you pass the criteria for working on ISO 26262, and this most definitely does. We looked at it earlier.
Lovely, thank you, Siri. Disco has made a statement. I'm not quite sure if it is a specific question. Again, you'll have to forgive me because I'm not technical. I'll read exactly what he says. He says, I'm still missing standards compliant from the webinar confirmation, requirements engineering and tests for standard compliant development. Does that make any sense from you from a technical point of view, or is it just... We haven't mentioned, within the actual tool itself, we haven't mentioned any of the standards, etc. But in reality, what the standard for ISO 26262 requires, and there's also a follow-on standard coming through for over 3.5 tons, and one coming out in 2018 for motorcycles. They all require that you do requirements engineering. Now, if you do requirements engineering, you need a set of requirements, but you also need to turn around somehow and trace them or map them in to whether you've got those passing or failing. Now, before we had this tool, we had to manually go through and copy and paste details of whether it was passing or failing for each particular requirement. That was very painful, and it was also time-consuming and dangerous, essentially, because you had no automated way of saying a requirement was completely working. We don't see any other tools out there doing that. If anybody's aware of any, I'd be pleased. I know that Mental Graphics have got a copy of Rectify, but they don't take the test plan, so they don't essentially have the goals within their tooling. And they do link to UCIS, but that's the only other one we can see. So for us, yes, it helps us attain compliance, because quite frankly at the moment, if I had an auditor come through and look at my old flow, I couldn't prove to you whether a requirement was actually passing within the tool. I'd have to go through and go into a protected fob and try and get some information from somebody, etc., which is very difficult. Thank you, Siri. Our next question is, are there any plans for integrating multiple projects? For example, in an SOC where there are multiple blocks?
Yeah. Yes, this is essentially what this round tripping will allow you to do. So if you're going to reuse information, then you can re-import it, and then you can, as you see, the hierarchy is up to you. So you can turn around and import multiple XMLs alongside each other, and then you can juggle them around if you like. And the whole point of part of the drive on this was the fact that we actually have that problem. We have a set of tests which we then need to go and give to the SOC guys, and part of the tooling that we're building on top of this now is a set, so we have the set of requirements, and then we're able to see who tests what at which domain. So do we test this at IP level, do we then test it at subsystem level, do we then test it at SOC level? And we also grade so that, for example, with the IP, we can say that we're just testing the interfaces before we give them a very early release. So therefore they know just to test the interfaces when they get it in there. If they start testing internally, they'll start debugging internally, and we haven't tested it yet, so we don't want to debug at 2 levels when it's not necessary. So yes, it's driven especially for that, really.
Lovely, thank you. Jamie Packer is asking, how is the database stored and does it support multiple users editing different parts of the hierarchy simultaneously?
Don't know on the hierarchy whether they can edit that at the one time. I do know that it's stored. We've got them all stored in a protected area and we back them up every night when we do snapshots. Another thing we're looking at doing is possibly taking the database at the end and actually exporting the entire database for extra audit purposes, because then at any point in the future you can always read a database information into any type of database so that we can come back to maintenance in 40 years' time. If the world's collapsed and AsureSign isn't there, we would always have that data.
Thank you.
So as for editing, there is some protection going on in it. I haven't actually used it in detail. But I believe there will be, and also allows you that locking of the editor.
Lovely, thank you. And the next question is, we build systems that have both hardware and software content. Will this support software too?
Yes. Currently, we're discussing with Rolls-Royce to extend this for GCAV and software. It's always planned that we wanted to do this for pre-silicon IP, system, subsystems, system on chip, post-silicon validation, firmware, software. So the work is ongoing that it will support everything. It will be a one-off tool to support the fact that we have this complex hardware software world. And a lot of that's come out of the ISO 26262, the fact that you have to have interface documents, etc. We needed to consider the entire flow. So yes.
Lovely. Well, I don't have any more questions at the moment, but if anybody listening to the webinar or indeed the recording of the webinar, if you do have any questions for us, you're more than welcome to contact us via our website, and we'll ask any questions that come in, and we'll make sure that they're directed at, to the appropriate person to answer them. I'll leave you to close the webinar. Thank you, Sari.
Okay, well, thank you very much for attending. And yeah, feel free to contact me if you want to discuss it any further, or you've got any other questions or suggestions. We're happy to listen. Okay, thank you very much. Bye.